Thomas Green here with the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. On the episode today, we have Claude Larson. Claude, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Well, I come to the podcast today as a couple of things. First, I am a parent, so I understand the shoes that all of your listeners have been standing in. My children are in their 30s now. I also had a career as a classroom teacher of teenage students. I taught science for 25 years. And based on that, and my experiences there and my desire to help young people build better habits, I actually created some lessons for them, piloted them in my classroom at the great peril and risk of possibly falling on my face in front of a bunch of, teenagers who can be brutal. And it was so transformational that I became an author of a book. It's called The Power of Choice, A Teen's Guide to Finding Personal Success.
Good intro. There's two ways I feel I can take it there, either regarding the power of choice or perhaps the lessons that you were referring to. I'd like to cover both of them, but do you want to start with what you decided to teach the teens in the class?
Sure. I'll give you a little backstory. So this was pre-pandemic, pre-remote learning and cohorts and hybrids and all of the new words that they made up and attached to what is education right now. And I noticed that my students were very influenced and very tied to their social media. And in that scroll and feed where they were getting information in fractions of a second, I realized it was affecting their attention span. It was affecting their social skills. It was affecting their ability to learn. And it was making my job harder and harder as an educator. So in a moment of clarity, when I was sitting at my desk, looking out the window, I said, what did I learn when I was their age in science? And I could attribute not one fact that I knew today to any of my science teachers at their age, right? So now I had like 14-year-olds at this point. And I thought, wow, that's one, maybe that's kind of sad, or maybe it's become part of my knowledge, or maybe it's science that isn't true anymore. I couldn't really pinpoint it, but I did remember my teacher, how he made me feel, the positivity that he brought into the classroom. And I thought, how do I do that? And I went home and I came up with some ideas that when these students leave my class at the end of this school year, what will I want them to have learned? And I always focused on things like cooperation and even meeting deadlines and, doing your best work and all of those things. And I thought, but I think there's so much more that they need to know to go out into the world and be successful. And these were sort of those universal truths that are going to be true. They were true 100 years ago. They're true today. They'll be true 100 years from now. And the fact that they're timeless makes them relevant today. And I wrote down things like excellence, because here in the United States, and I don't know if they do this where you are, but there's a lot of, little, when they're playing sports recreationally, they don't keep score and every game's a tie and everybody gets a trophy. And so children here get the idea that if I have this trophy, then I've done something excellent. And they may in fact have only shown up, maybe even against their will, if their parents are dragging them to do it, and participated, and they confuse excellence and the effort that it requires to become excellent with, well, isn't everybody that? And so some of my lessons were about excellence. They were about attitude, what attitude you bring to anything that you do. I talk about very mundane things in the book, but they're all to get them to become more self-aware of their habits, how they approach their habits, their values, their boundaries. And I just think it's such an important age for them to get some established boundaries. It's so easy to be led by other teenagers down paths into shenanigans that you shouldn't be getting involved in. But if you know your boundaries and you've written down and thought about and established your values, it's a lot easier to say no. It's not easy to say no, because let's face it, they're teenagers and there's a lot of pressure to conform to the peer group, but it's easier to say, no, that's not something I want to get involved in because, right? And they start setting up some whys for themselves. Topics like, I discuss about holding grudges and what creativity is, self-love, which is really hard in teen years. And there's actually 30 chapters, because as a teacher, I wrote this for my classroom. And here in the US, the school year is about 36, 37 weeks long. And I thought, well, you get started, you get the first couple of weeks under your belt, establish your routines and what you want kids to have and what are your expectations. Then I can start doing these lessons. I was doing them once a week, every Monday, 10, 15 minutes. I would invest 10 to 15 minutes on that day, tell them a short story, and then ask them to do self-reflection questions. Now, this started out as thoughts on sticky notes that I just off the cuff told to my classroom. And it built into what is now a book, an ebook, and a teacher's edition, actually, for educators. So they can do this in their classroom, have independent lessons. Kids, when I tell you, you could just see the look on their face, the wheels turning, them thinking about their life, and writing down their thoughts about that. I never asked them to share it. I never graded it. I never collected it. I never did any of those things. But the level of self-awareness that happened in my room transformed the entire environment. They were nicer to each other. They were more engaged in academic tasks and any tasks, really. I could see kindness growing. I could see them setting boundaries, so that now the kid who might have been sort of pushy and trying to take over the lab team, people were like, well, wait a minute, why don't we listen to this person instead of the loudest person? And I could see these transformations happening. And I was witnessing them, but there were also teenage boys. So for the listening audience out there, teenage boys were handwriting me thank you notes and leaving them on my desk on their way out of class to say, thank you for doing this. These are things I never thought about. Keep doing them, because I did it as an experiment. Being a science teacher, I thought this is a great experiment. I'll either fall on my face and everybody will forget about it. But I committed 10 weeks. I said, I'm going to do it for 10 weeks, see what happens. You can't just do like a one-off and expect change. I saw change in 1 week. I did it for 10 weeks. At the end of the 10 weeks, I said, well, guys, this is the last Mindful Monday. And the class looked at me like, this cannot possibly be the last time we do this. Like, we're not done, right? We're going to keep going. And at that point, I knew that they were as invested in this as I was in coming up with these little mini lessons.
Why do you think it was so impactful?
I think there were a couple reasons. One, questions they hadn't thought about phrased in ways they hadn't thought about them. And I don't, and I don't, I think a lot of households weren't having these conversations, right? Parents are busy. You got to get everybody out of bed and dressed and on the bus, and you got to have lunches made, and you got to have dinner made, and you've got your own job and the housework. And I think there just wasn't a lot of time to sit and have these conversations, and their attention was being pulled in so many directions. So if I'm not getting a text message, I'm getting a notification from TikTok, or I'm scrolling through my Instagram feed, or name the social media of the day. But they have this constant distraction, and they're not allowed to get bored and have some thoughts to themselves. A lot of them are overscheduled. They've got school, they've got homework after that, they've got extracurricular activities, sports, all the things. And it's like they're on the hamster wheel, and they just keep going and going and going, and they don't stop and think about a lot of things. I had some kids who were on sports, and they would complain about going to practice. And one day they were all commiserating, oh, today it's going to be horrible at lacrosse practice. And I said, why do you stay on the team? I said, I played a sport, middle school, high school, 7 years. I loved going to practice. I loved carrying that equipment. When it was in my hands, I was so happy to have it. I was so happy to be running around on a field hockey field. I loved it. I loved practice. I loved games. I loved all of it. I said, if you hate it, if you hate practice, like maybe you should invest your time doing something else. And they looked at me like that was madness. And I said, no, really, think about it. And suddenly they were like, And at that point I said, well, take two approaches: stop complaining and enjoy it, or find something you enjoy. And it was like nobody had that conversation with them. It was just expected. And I don't know if it was expected because somebody else in the family, maybe an older sibling, had done that, and so therefore they were just following the leader, or nobody had expected anything different, and so therefore they hadn't ever really evaluated how they wanted to invest their time. Because honestly, if you're going to lacrosse practice and you'd really rather learn to play the guitar or the piano or the violin, then figure that out sooner than later, and you'll be on a road to more happiness and perhaps less arguing about getting in the car and getting there. And nobody's got to listen to you complain if you're doing something that you enjoy.
Have you got any individual instances that you're particularly proud of? Examples of let's say a team that you impacted with the, is it Monday mindfulness? Was that what you called it?
I called it Mindful Monday. It didn't end up being the title of the book. It was just I needed a hook, and I started doing that on the board. I have two stories. One I always choke up at, so I'm gonna, just put that out as a disclaimer. And the other one was just really quite remarkable, although there were several. And often we would do these lessons, and you never know who's in what place, right? Because I have 120 or more students a year. And you never know who's having the struggle, because some kids are just better at carrying it than other kids. And I had one student who was, he went from stable family, middle class life, both parents working, did not want for anything, had nice clothes, always well presented, clean, good student, did his work, tried hard, conscientious, all of that. And slowly it was the academics started to slip, and then his personal appearance, like he always looked disheveled. Then it was, acne breaking out all over his face, was coming to school with red eyes. All signs pointed to this kid is maybe experimenting with a substance he shouldn't. I mean, that's exactly what it looked like. And the true story was, mom was on her third round of rehab. Dad was going broke trying to pay for it. Dad got unfocused at work, lost his job. They couldn't pay their mortgage. The kids got separated, each living at a different grandparent's house. Dad's living in the remaining family car that wasn't repossessed. I mean, slippery slope, more like a cliff, and you're watching this and it, because you, as a teacher, you think, oh, did he start vaping with the other kids? Is he experimenting with drugs? Like, you don't know. Then when the true story comes out, it's like, that's really sad. And I did my first lesson, and I did a quick 2-minute meditation where the kids, they close their eyes and they focus on one hand. And I suggest that their fingers are getting longer and longer and longer, longer, higher than the trees, poking through the clouds, edge of the atmosphere. It's a, pretty classic, like Qigong meditation. And when they put their hands back together, one palm will actually be longer than the other, because the suggestion actually opens the joints, right? And at that moment, I talked about how your thoughts can change your physical being. And that's how powerful that is, right? You can change your health, you can change your mindset, you can change so many things just through the power of your thinking. And in that moment, that student looked at me, stood up, clapped, and said, "Thank you." And he knew in that moment that his life was going to be a matter of his thoughts and his choices. And it wasn't going to look like what he was experiencing in that moment. And that was when I said, oh my gosh, because first try, you think this could fail miserably. And boy, in that moment, it didn't. I helped, you always say, if I can help one person, right? And my other story is, I had a young girl, teenage girl, and I did a whole lesson on grudges. And, I tell the story of the two monks, and another old, old classic timeless stories, and how one monk gets angry at the other monk for speaking to a woman and helping her. And the other monk is like, you should never do that. Our master told us never talk to a woman, never touch a woman. He helps her across a river. And, and the one monk says, I put her down a half an hour ago and you still carry her. Right. And it's just all about carrying these grudges. Like, how long are you going to be angry about something? And we talk about how the only reason you have a grudge is because somebody in a situation did something you would not have done. So now suddenly you're offended and you're angry, and you're going to carry that around forever because they made a different choice than you would have made in that same situation. And really, that's like what it boils down to at its most basic level. And so we talked about, are you holding any grudges? How long have you been carrying it? Is there somebody who always comes by and slams your locker when you're trying to get your books out, and it's just frustrating? Well, do you carry that for 30 seconds? Do you carry that into your next class? Do you carry that for the rest of the day? Do you go home and say, gosh, this kid is so annoying? Like, how long? And we start just talking about this. She comes to me at the end of class. She makes an excuse so her friends can go to their next class, and she just wants to linger and have a conversation with me. And she says, my father has not spoken to his brother in 10 years. And so, there's this big family riff. And I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. She says, yeah, he's holding a grudge. Her uncle tried to take his own life, and her father is so mad he won't talk to him. And I'm like, you realize that your uncle in that situation could not think of another alternative, where your father maybe in that situation would have thought of another alternative. It's just they made different choices, right? Like, and so now he's holding a grudge against a brother who probably needs his love and support more than he needs this grudge. She went home and had that conversation with her dad, which I thought, wow, she came in and was like, yeah, he listened. And, what happened between the brothers, I'll never know. But I thought, well, I think it was important that she went home and had that conversation.
It's one of those I'll never know that you wish you knew, or?
No, I think I'm happy knowing that, one, she became aware of what the situation was, saw it for what it was, and like took the steps to do what she could at her age between two people and a relationship. She did what she could. She went home and had the conversation, which may have been taboo, may have never been addressed prior. And I think my focus was like, I'm here to help my students do this. And, like the pebble in a pond, right? Where those ripples go, I don't know, but I know where I can affect change. And that was always the goal. Like, I want them to be a better and best version of themselves, but they're only going to get there if they think about it. And if they make the personal choices they need, based on what they want.
So excluding for a second buying the power of choice, which would be a good idea for this particular question. What do you do if you're a parent who has a teenager and you'd like them to be exposed to the type of, let's say, questioning and self-knowledge that you were encouraging? What's your advice there to that person or to that parent?
So you're saying short of buying the book. I think as a parent, one, take some time and do a little self-awareness for yourself. Like, what are my values? How am I passing that down to my kids? What are my boundaries, right? What will I do to get what I want? And what won't I do to get what I want? Which, all you have to do is turn on the TV news and you will see people's boundaries screaming at you, right? Some people will do absolutely anything to get what they want, right? Lie, cheat, steal, manipulate. And some people just work hard and set their own path. And I think if parents can share their positive habits, their values, and their why, right? Like in this, like I personally value whatever it might be. It could be something spiritual. It could be something in the health realm, right? I value good health. And therefore that is why I pay for a gym membership and I go there regularly. And I know that you think I'm taking time away from our family, but what I'm actually doing is staying healthy so that when I'm home, I can do the things that we want to do as a family, or that I have the energy to, do the things that bring me happiness, that bring this family happiness, that make this a better family unit. And I think doing a little self-assessment is a great idea. I also, I know there are podcasts out there on self-improvement. There's some of the great sort of timeless writers. Earl Nightingale comes to mind, right? Going to your local library and reading some of his stuff. Joseph Campbell's another great one. And getting your own thoughts in line, but then making the time to have those conversations with your child, because I get it. Life is busy, been there, done that. Everybody's eating dinner at a different time because we've got sports schedules and places to be, and, school and work and all of that. But it's really sitting down, making the time and having those conversations, because they don't know where you stand until you tell them. And telling our kids, don't do something because it's bad, right, is not the same as saying, I don't want you to do this because, and I value good health. Therefore, I don't want you underage drinking, right? I value a solid work ethic, which is why I want you to be doing your homework. I'm not just yelling at you to do your homework because it's about grades. It's about a habit that will sustain you the rest of your life, being able to start something, finish it, hand it in, right? Ship, as they say, and do that over and over and over again. And if you're teaching your kids that finishing is important, seeing the job through, seeing the task through, and then showing them by example, I think that goes a long way once you add the conversation, because they see you doing things around the house, but they don't know your why. Why are you maintaining the house a certain way?
What would be good to know is maybe your approach in how you went about imparting that information. So you gave the example of the meditation one, but what springs to mind for parents, I would imagine, who have teens, is that they do either talk to them or possibly at them, but it's perhaps not in a formal setting like you recommended. It's more like I don't know. I think there's probably an absence of approach in that one. So let's say you wanted to impart a lesson in the way that you have. What would you recommend for that parent who, let's say they get the silent teenager or the silent treatment? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah, we get that a lot, right? How was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. Right. It can be hard to start a conversation with them. They're much more locked in with what their peers are doing or what social media is doing. I think the greatest lessons are the ones that you can take from your life experiences, right? The things that happened when you were a kid. The things that, because they have no idea, right? Let's say your child is 16 years old. They have no idea what 16 looked like when you were 16, that you weren't carrying around an iPhone or having the devices, you didn't have the social media, internet wasn't so prevalent in your life. You probably weren't working on laptops in school unless it was a really remarkable situation. But I think drawing from your own life experiences and saying, there was a time, right? And I remember, stuff like when my child's bike got stolen, I was like, that stinks, but I'm glad that you're not the person who stole a bike.
Would you say that you're an advocate of a parable then?
Oh, I love the parable. Love the parable. And there's a lot of older ones in there. And then I created some all on my own that were very relatable for anybody really, but for teenagers, right? Because we're trying to get them to connect to stuff. But I mean, I do one where you talk about like the food pyramid. Does your government give you like a food pyramid, what you should eat a little of and what you should eat a lot of, and this whole thing. And I go through and I really reshuffle that. And I say, well, the food pyramid is 4 things. It tastes good and it's good for you, right? It tastes bad and it's good for you. It tastes good and it's bad for you. It tastes bad and it's bad for you. And we just talk about how, like, if it tastes good and it's good for you, give me some things, strawberries and, apples, and they're naming foods, and, oh, it tastes bad, but it's good for you. And they're like, oh, I hate Brussels sprouts, or I hate asparagus, right? They're maybe not usually a big fan of vegetables at that age. Then it's, oh, tastes good, bad for you. And they're like, we know that, Coca-Cola and Doritos, we know these things are not good for your health, and making a general diet of them is not going to have a positive effect, right? You cannot be eating, junk food, candy, sweets, and cookies all day long and be feeling top notch at the end of the day. And the last one is like, tastes bad, bad for you. So spoiled, rotten, overcooked, undercooked, like, so we kind of nail that down. And then it's, all right, now I want you to make a list of all the things you did this weekend. And now I want you to put them in categories. It felt good and it was good for you. It felt bad, but it's good for you. It felt good, but it's bad for you. It felt bad and it's bad for you. And now all of a sudden it all makes sense. Oh, so, listening to my music felt good. It's also good for me, right? Doing my homework felt bad, but I know it's good for me. Maybe trash talking my friends or doing a lot of complaining, it might feel good, but in the end, it's not bad for you, or it's bad for you, not good for the mindset. And then they were writing down things in categories, feels bad, bad for you. At one point I gave them markers and I had whiteboards and I said, write, the 4 categories, write anything you want. Don't sign your name. It's anonymous. I'm not looking. They wrote things like cheating on an exam feels bad, bad for me. Like, they know they're not, it's like, you can fool yourself into that's okay, but it's not. They'd say things like lying to my parents. They know they're doing it. They feel bad doing it, and they know it's bad for them because it always comes back. But, that, just like that kind of stuff, like really breaking it down and analyzing your behavior. Oh, I played video games all weekend for, 30 out of the, 48 hours that I was home. And they're like, yeah, I probably could do something else with my time. Like, yeah, like, I'm not saying don't play for an hour, but maybe not 30 hours on a 48-hour weekend, and they were recognizing it. They were saying it. And all of a sudden it just brought this awareness. And it's just like little simple things like that. And I made that one up. That's not, I think the concept is timeless, but I never saw it anywhere else. And that's, you just kind of have to take the teachable moments, take the opportunity, even when you think they're not listening, at the supper table, when you all get around it, or whoever's at the supper table. Because not, especially in the teenage years, maybe they have after school jobs or activities or whatever. Not everybody has dinner together every night, like, the bucolic family of the past. But whoever you have at the table, no devices, we're just having conversation. And I know that that's hard for teenagers, but I know it's becoming increasingly hard for parents, because now you're working remotely and you're getting emails and text messages and communication on your phone, and you're trying to address that, but you're also trying to get dinner on the table. You're trying to have a peaceful dinner. Like, unless your phone number is 911, put the phone away and just have conversation. It's awkward at first, especially if your kids are a little resistant, or I shouldn't even say resistant, if they're typical teenagers who can give you one-word answers to everything, it becomes awkward. But then you just start asking the questions like, what's the funniest thing that happened in school today? And next thing you know, they're like blabbing away and telling you about it. You don't say like, how was school? Because that could be a one-word answer, but like, what was the funniest thing that happened? Now you got to tell me a story, right? What was the worst thing that happened in school today? Because if you say, did anything good happen in school today? They're going to be like, no. But if you ask them to give you a story, they will. They have them, they're experiencing them. You just have to provide the setting, time, opportunity, and patient ear to hear it through.
What's the biggest misconception about teens that you think's prevalent?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think one big misconception that I learned by doing these lessons with my students was that the kids who were viewed as very popular were the happiest. And it turns out they are stressed, they are concerned about their popularity, keeping it, not doing anything to jeopardize it, not to fall from grace and be pushed off their pedestal. They often have just as many family and relationship issues as the kids who are not in that crowd. They just, I don't know, maybe sometimes I think, they all have a weight and some of them just carry it better. But I think the big misconception among peers is, oh, they're always smiling and happy, and that's, because they're popular. And it's like, no, it might be because they're compartmentalizing it. And some of the kids who are really quiet, who you think maybe they have lower self-esteem, and things like that, I found by doing this and getting them in touch with themselves, they had such a boost in like self-worth and self-value. They started speaking up in class, and I mean, yes, raising their hand, answering questions, that's fine. But as a science teacher, they worked in groups of 4 around lab tables, and the kids who wouldn't say a word through a lab activity suddenly were speaking up. And it was because they're like, yeah, you know what? I do have ideas. I do have value. I do have worth. And I think, there's these misconceptions from the outward appearance. Just like I was telling you the story of the student who, by all other outside appearance, he looked like he had started either using drugs or vaping, right? But the reality was it was all completely understandable what he was going through and why it was affecting his physical health. But it wasn't what anybody thought it was.
Would you like to take a minute and talk about the power of choice for a bit?
Okay, sure. So it's as I said before, 30 chapters based on an academic year. I think it's a great resource for parents to read. And once you read it and ask yourself some of the questions, I think it's a great idea to hand it to your teenage child and never look at it again. Once they write their personal, private things in there, it's okay to have conversations about things. I don't think it's okay to pry or make them share, if that's what I'm thinking. It's gosh, it's so, I've had so many adults read it, both educators, parents of young adults, like in their young 20s, who have said, wow, like I learned a lot about myself by reading this book. And it's just stuff, our life has gotten so busy and hectic that we don't sit and think about it. We just, we just get on the road for, got to go to work, got to do this, got to do that. We don't take time to just sort of figure out who we are on the road. We just get on the road. And this has helped them make decisions that make them happier. Even like work decisions, right? I had somebody say how like she started realizing she had no boundaries at work, and everything they asked her to do, she kept saying yes. And she was getting more and more stressed out. And then she was getting more colds, and then she wasn't feeling well. And then she was crabby with her family. And, and all of a sudden she was like, she stopped herself. And when the boss said, okay, I need you to do this, she turned and said, well, what other task that you've given me would you like me to not do so that I can do that? Like, it was kind of like a very polite no. And I think, all of a sudden the boss was like, oh, right, you are not a machine. Like and she started making some changes, and all of a sudden she wasn't as stressed. I mean, work can still be stressful, let's face it. But she came home feeling like, okay, I did what I could do today, and I'm not going to take anything out on anybody else. So I don't know. I just think it's a great resource, but it's timeless. It's really timeless stuff. It's been lost in the technology, fast paced, everything's the new fad. What's hot today, what's coming next week, what new version of what device or phone is coming out. And like, people are focused outwardly. We've lost the inward piece. And I mean, I find myself, when I was writing these, it was so grounding. And I became less stressed because my students were so positive. And I was a science teacher, safety first. I was a very diligent, I was very diligent about behavior in my class. And some kids were like, you're strict. And I'm like, no, I'm diligent, like safety first. Everybody goes home with the same bits and pieces they came in with. Like, that's the focus. And I just found I didn't have to be, because now they understood why I needed their behavior to be a certain way. And they were checking themselves. Like, they were self-correcting because they would realize that they were off track, and that it wasn't me. They fixed issues themselves. And I had low-level discipline issues, like the interrupters and the kids who were off task doing silly things. I didn't have like fights breaking out and that kind of stuff. It wasn't like some hardcore situation, but all of those just like disappeared. Like I couldn't explain it. I could not explain it. All I can say is, I think that when I gave them the self-awareness piece, and I gave them the time, like, I didn't just pose a question and say, hey guys, I really want you to think, what are you willing to do to get what you want? And I didn't then just go on with my science lesson. I was like, take a piece of paper, tell you a little story, and now I want you to think about this. And nobody's exchanging answers, nobody's talking to each other. And they just took time, which we don't give them time. The minute they have time, they're scrolling on their phone, they're playing the video game, they're watching the TV, whatever, like, insert distraction here. They don't know what it is to just sit and think without it being forced. Like, okay, now I have to think about these math problems, or now I have to think about this English paper. And it's just creating that time. But I think a parent's experiences, because when you're a parent and you're sharing this with your child, you don't have to explain a whole lot. They know the players, they know grandma, they know Uncle Bob, they know all these people. So you don't have to explain the characters. You don't need to invent scenarios. You just say, oh, well, when that happened, right? This happened a long time ago, or this is part of our family thing, or this thing happened at work. Now, I could continue to be really angry with my coworker, but I decided they just made a different choice than I would have made. I realized it doesn't really impact my job. And so I've decided to not let it annoy me, right? That's a super valuable lesson for a kid to hear, because, someday they're going to have a job and they might have a coworker that does things that they find annoying. And if you step back and say, yeah, but I realized it doesn't need to impact what I do or how I do it, it's a lot easier to let it go.
Did you have any conversations with your grown-up children after going through all this?
Yes, well, it was funny because a lot of these conversations I don't want to say I had these specific conversations with them, but these lessons were things that I brought to them when they were young. And I would, I think my favorite time in their life was they were teenagers, and it was that period of time when they're learning to drive, but they don't yet have their license. So now I say, oh, I got to go run 4 or 5 errands in town. Do you want to drive? And they're eager for the opportunity to get behind the wheel. And you have all this uninterrupted time because they can't look at their phone. You can have a conversation, and they're sort of like, I don't want to say trapped, but pretty much, there's, their friends aren't in there. There's no distraction. It's just the two of you. And you could have these really important conversations about day-to-day things. And like, they could see my interaction with the store clerk who's really, maybe a bit rude at checkout. And I go, oh, I bet she's had a lot of really difficult customers today. And so right there, they see, like, I didn't take it personally. I didn't attack this person, but it was like, oh, I bet she's just having a bad day. Or maybe the last 10 people in front of me weren't very nice to her, or maybe her computer isn't working. And so she's frustrated. Right. But it was like the gentle, like they were like, yeah, you're right. Like, we're not going to say, oh, that person was a jerk. Like, oh, everybody has that time when that's, their life conditions, and they let it get to them, and it is what it is, and walk out. And now as adults, I see them, they have amazing, like, they have really established their values. Their families know their values. They have very good boundaries. They're hardworking, they're productive, they're really good at their jobs, valued by their employers. And I think it's because they bring this interpersonal and intrapersonal skill set to the setting.
Good answer. Where is the best place for people to find you, and also to buy the book?
So the book is available on Amazon. There is, for any educator out there, there is a teacher's edition. So that would be all of the exact same lessons that are in the regular edition. And then every chapter, I give an extension activity that you can do as a whole class that never requires anybody to give away anything personal that's going on in their life. And they can share sort of, I want to say, like, anonymously. And I'll give an example for, let's say we're talking about excellence. One of the topics, you draw a line on the board, everybody gets 2 little sticky notes or 2 pieces of paper with tape. And on the board, on one side, you write never, the other side, you write always. And now it's just, every kid has to write a never and an always. An excellent person, they all know an excellent person. It doesn't matter if it's a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a celebrity, it doesn't matter. Somebody who's excellent, what do they never do? What do they always do? Tape it on the board. Don't write your name on it. And now you can have a whole conversation about, these are the characteristics of excellence. And, all of a sudden they get not only their ideas of excellence, other people's ideas of excellence. So teacher's edition, super helpful. There's an ebook as well. And I think as a parent, that's probably an easy way to get the gist of things, it's a low investment for what you get out of it. I do work with organizations as well. So if anybody out there listening is interested in bulk copies, they can contact me through my website, which is claudeblarsonllc.com. And I can order bulk copies, so you don't have to pay royalties. You pay like printer and shipping fees. I mean, the whole goal of the book is to help as many people as I can. And I really thought that the pandemic would destroy my chances at that. And I feel like now more than ever, kids need it, schools need it, teachers need it. And it's and that's the feedback I'm getting from my former colleagues. You know, I've some of them have my book and they're using it and they're like, yeah, this is making a big difference, because they've lost a lot of habits. And how do you rebuild them? You know, it's hard to do it from the outside. They have to do it from the inside out.
It's a great point. Is there anything that I should have asked you today?
Should have asked me today. I don't know. I think you were super thorough.
I'll take it. Thank you very much.
Thank
Claude,
you.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.